Hey y'all, welcome to Parent Power with Mandy Drogin. I'm Mandy. I'm just a mom sitting down having real conversations with real Texans about what's going on in our state. Today, I am excited to be joined by Jordan Cope. Jordan is a double graduate of UT and UT Law, and he is an expert in the Islamists that are in Qatar and how they're infiltrating Texas. Jordan, thanks for being here.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much.
So you're a Longhorn.
Double Longhorn,
Yeah.
undergrad and law, and I also, way back in the day, even tried out as a field goal kicker and a walk-on.
Wow. Well, our guests probably wouldn't realize that because you sound a little different.
Of course. So my dad is originally from the UK, my mom from Texas. Both tried teaching me English, and I got a little bit confused.
Got
But
it.
I did go to high school, lower school, born and raised in Dallas, huge Rangers fan, and a proud Texan.
I love it. Well, we're so glad to have you on, and I am grateful for the work that you've been doing to expose the nefarious soft power tactics of the Islamists in Qatar. So Qatar, we can talk a lot about Islamist regimes, but a lot of times Qatar has seemed to be off limits for one reason or another, while they are the drivers, particularly in Texas, of investing in our institutions, in infrastructure, in different aspects of our society. And ultimately, they're also funding the enemies at Hamas and other designated terrorist groups. So tell us, how did you or why did you start looking into the country and the leaders of Qatar?
When it comes to Qatar, I actually stumbled into it quite by an accident. I mean, many youth like me would go play soccer at Clark Field at UT, and we'd see students wearing FC Barcelona jerseys, branding sponsorship such as Qatar Airways or the Qatar Foundation. And so as a youth, I would like to still think I'm young, by the way, but many would think about Qatar in a positive light, a patron of sports, a patron of one of the world's best airlines, a patron of US education, universities. And how I stumbled into Qatar was quite an accident. So I was a senior in undergrad, and in a class called Health and Terrorism, we were tasked with investigating the sources of funding for certain terrorist groups throughout the Middle East and beyond. And I just happened to be assigned Hamas and Hezbollah. And I ultimately, when reviewing their financing, when reviewing where they're getting their funding from, was completely shocked to see that while many in the United States criticized state sponsors of terrorism such as Iran, nobody was talking about Qatar, which has given Hamas approximately $2 billion since 2012. It's debatable who is the biggest funder of Hamas these days. Is it Qatar or is it Iran? Qatar is estimated to give Hamas approximately $30 million a month, or at least it has in recent years. And so that sum was so staggering to later find out. But as a university student, I was so shocked to continuously see Qatar's involvement with Hamas. And in addition, to learn about how the emir said something along the lines of back in the day, that he considers he supports the Palestinian people, and he considers Hamas an important part of the Palestinian people. So the emir made quite clear that he refused to disassociate from Hamas. And as it would later become clear through my research, it wasn't just Hamas, but it was also ties to other terrorist organizations throughout the Middle East or affiliates thereof. And so later on in my research, I became a fellow at Middle East Forum, but right now in my capacity at StandWithUs, Director of Policy of Education, where I've been engrossed in research about Qatar's funding and infiltration of the education system in the US, of the law enforcement system, etc., I ultimately discovered that Hamas was also one of the world's largest sponsors of the Muslim Brotherhood, which ultimately seeks to establish a global caliphate and to conquer the world. So we need to be worried about the imminent threat that is in the United States and in Texas, as I highlighted in a recent article of mine.
You did. You highlighted it for TBPF, and that is on our website. I encourage our viewers to go look at that. Let's talk a little bit about your role at Stand With Us. Why are you researching, and why are they so eager to have you be researching and continue to make these ties, particularly when it comes to education and other social services that are provided in our communities?
Right. So Stand With Us is a nonpartisan education organization devoted to combating anti-Semitism and misinformation about Israel and the Jewish people.
Okay.
Hand in hand, however, when it comes to combating forces such as the Muslim Brotherhood, there is anti-American activity, which of course we are all concerned about as proud Americans. And so what we have been seeing is we previously thought that Qatar, one of the largest de facto state sponsors of terrorism, managed to continuously fund U.S. educational institutions. We once thought that Qatar funded $1.5 billion to U.S. education in recent decades. Then we thought it was $6.5 billion. Well, now recent estimates by the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism Policy suggest that it's $20 billion. So this funding is out of control. There are multiple U.S. colleges, universities that have branches, satellites in Qatar as we speak right now, in Education City in Qatar. And reported on this campus is a building, a research center named after Yusuf al-Qaradawi, the former head of the Muslim Brotherhood, who endorsed suicide bombings. So our students are being put into environments where they are being cultured effectively into normalizing terrorism. And what we've seen is reports, one from Harvard, a poll suggesting that students aged 18 to 24 in America, of that age group, approximately 50% now support Hamas in the United States, a terrorist group that killed over 1,200 people on October 7th, including 46, I believe, Americans. What we're also seeing effectively is reports such as by ISCAP, that think tank I referenced earlier, that has acknowledged that Qatari funding has had a direct effect on increasing anti-Semitism and anti-democratic views and activity on college campuses. So if we are to save the future of America and to ensure that they truly are having an education that seeks to culture them, that seeks to promote free speech. And it should be noted that these contracts with Qatari, with Education City and the Qatar Foundation, the Qatari institution that sponsors American education at these colleges, we need to understand the threat that it poses to distance ourselves from Qatari institutions, to purge Qatari funding from American education. But also here at home in Texas, we need to take initiative to ultimately address the rising Qatari influence in our education system here.
Yeah. So I want to go back and talk a little bit. You mentioned Education City, that's in Doha. Doha is the capital of Qatar, and part of their soft power play, very similar to Confucius Institutes that the Chinese Communist Party put in universities and high schools all throughout America as a soft power play to effectively indoctrinate American students into being open to communist ideology. This was part of their subversive tactics to weaponize our freedoms and our love of a classical liberal education and use that to indoctrinate for Marxist ideas. And so what is happening that is very similar, Qatar took a page out of China's playbook and said, we have all of this oil and we can use our resources to invest in things that the West loves. So you talk about sports. I remember, I can remember seeing their Qatari Airlines and things like that on soccer jerseys and whatnot. But in our school system, and we'll get to K through 12 in just a minute, but we know that Texas A&M is one of the largest recipients of Qatari funds. I would say blood money. Absolutely, it is blood money. You brought up the atrocities on October 7th, and we saw the results of the propaganda when you had college campuses, including here at UT right down the street and others, where you had students waving flags in favor and had posters, Free Palestine. They have no clue what the people in Palestine live like. There is no freedom. This is not a free society. This is a Islamist-controlled, dictatorial, murderous regime whose goal is to spread a caliphate, particularly into the Western civilization. So I think that that's important. So what I've heard people say is, well, we shut down our campus in Doha. So it's important, our campus as in Texas A&M's. But to your point, there are still many American institutions of higher learning that are still in Doha, correct?
When it comes to Texas institutions, the Texas A&M campus will wind down. However, there is Carnegie Mellon, there is Georgetown, there is Northwestern, there is Virginia Commonwealth. These are satellite branches that remain an integral part of Education City, not to forget Cornell when it comes to their medical school. And I just want to mention quickly, why should we be so concerned about the Qatar Foundation? Many might think it's a charity. It is actually a state-created enterprise that was created in 1995 or 1996. In 1995, there was a coup by the Emir's father, who was a coup at the time. And as part of the regime institutionalizing itself, consolidating and projecting power, because a lot of the Gulf countries essentially objected to this coup because it threatened the monarchy and the line of succession in their own countries. Qatar at that moment realized that it needed friends from beyond the Gulf. So it started appealing to the West. It started within 1 year. It founded the Qatar Foundation. It founded the Al Jazeera network to project its views across the Middle East. On top of that, it basically began construction on the Al Udeid military base, which Qatar doesn't allow America to so effectively use in its times of crisis. And on top of that, though not officially instituted by the state of Qatar, the U.S. Qatar Business Council was also formed, which now lobbies American politicians throughout the country, bringing them to Qatar, including certain state congressmen and congresswomen in the state of Texas. And on top of that, meeting with mayors of cities, even including in Texas, to promote business with Qatar. The Qatar Foundation, going back to the question, it's a state enterprise. It was founded by the state of Qatar. And the contracts between the Qatar Foundation and the universities have arguably limited free speech on campuses. As part of these contracts, one has to abide by the laws of Qatar. And of course, the laws of Qatar institute that criticism against the regime, and I believe of Islam as well, is also not allowed. And what we've seen is, because the relationships are so tight between these universities and the Qatar Foundation, that sometimes it spills over onto American campuses in the United States itself. Such as at Northwestern, there is a scandal about statements that had been altered because of objections from Northwest University Qatar officials who denied effectively that Hamas had killed people in their beds on October 7th and had raped civilians. And effectively, that professor who refused effectively to criticize the October 7th attacks as such, the dean at Northwestern University Qatar reportedly tried to change a statement at Northwestern University proper to condemn that professor at the Qatar branch. But I guess going back to, as well, Qatar Foundation has funded high schools. It's given them millions of dollars as well. And what we've seen have been the Qatar Foundation trying to institute curriculums that, according to Americans for Tolerance and Peace, have tried to defame and delegitimize the Jewish people. It is mind-boggling to me how American institutions continue to openly embrace funding from a state that enabled the 9/11 attacks by harboring the mastermind behind the 9/11 attacks, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. When the US was closing in on his arrest in the mid-1990s before 9/11, Qatari officials reportedly tipped him off and allowed him to leave the country. Had he been arrested, it's possible 9/11 might not have happened. Later on, during the wars on terrorism, Al Jazeera officials representing the state of Qatar's media enterprise manned booby traps where US soldiers were attacked. This is according to Michael Rubin at Middle East Forum now. And on top of that, they helped restore the Taliban to power, according to Seth Frantzman of the Jerusalem Post. This is a regime that time and time again has supported Islamist movements throughout the Middle East, whether it be the Muslim Brotherhood, or whether it be movements that have American blood on their hands, whether it be in the October 7th attacks, the 9/11 attacks, or whether it be supporting the Taliban, which ambushed our troops in Afghanistan, Qatar is no faithful ally to the United States. It does not matter the amount of money that they give. They claim to present themselves as a mediating force, as a diplomatic force that might engage with terrorist organizations in good faith. However, research that I helped reveal at Middle East Forum went to show that though Qatar claimed that it was entering the Gaza Strip effectively for humanitarian purposes, one of its largest state-affiliated charities, the Eid charity, a significant sum of money was going to affiliates of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Somebody asked me where their humanitarian motive is. Going to IHH, an extremist group in Turkey, affiliates of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, IHH in Turkey, and affiliates of Hamas. But most importantly, the head of this Committee for the Reconstruction of Gaza was meeting with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which serves no diplomatic purpose and strictly military. So Qatar's motives need to be clarified for Texans. They might give us a lot of money, but they are certainly not our friend. They support ideologies that ultimately are entirely antithetical to Texans and the American people at large.
Yeah, I think that's really important when people say, who are less versed, certainly than you, but really even Texans are starting to wake up and they're seeing this Islamist political ideology that have infected our communities throughout Texas, this Islamist supremacy notion where they are utilizing soft power, which we would say trying to pretend like they're friends until they can obtain that power. And so what you're saying is that Qatar actively, still for decades, funds entities that murder American sons and daughters. Is this what you're saying?
Well, certainly, Qatar, as a nation, as a state itself, funds terrorist groups. It's without doubt. They fund as well extremist groups such as the Muslim Brotherhood. They did so throughout the Arab Spring. That's another motive of Qatari soft power, which is to whitewash their support for extremist groups that waged wars and insurrections throughout the Middle East. These wars killed hundreds of thousands of people. They gave $10 billion in loans to the Mohamed Morsi government in Egypt. They supported the Ennahda movement, a slightly less violent, a bit of a less violent movement, but still
like an oxymoron. But
yeah, in Tunisia, they supported the Al-Islah party in Yemen, and it's rumored as well that they might have also sponsored the Houthis in Yemen. Qatar plays a bit of a double game. Their ideology is a Salafist, jihadist ideology. However, at the same time, every now and then you see them intersecting with other movements or countries of other ideologies, such as Iran, which supports a Shiite Islamist ideology when it comes to certain agenda items, such as destroying Israel and keeping the West out of the Middle East. And so the Qatar Foundation, though, going back to the theme of education, something not to forget is that the Qatar Foundation reportedly bestowed upon Ismail Haniyeh, the former head of Hamas, a Victory Shield Award. So the Qatar Foundation, that same institution that celebrates the former chief ideologue of the Muslim Brotherhood, whose chapters have recently been designated as terrorist groups in the United States, that same entity that supports Hamas, that same entity that supports Muslim Brotherhood outfits throughout the Middle East, involved in wars that have claimed hundreds of thousands of lives, is funding American students as we speak.
So, yes, let's go back to the education. So I brought up Texas A&M, but of course, this is universities throughout America are there on their education campus. We are winding down our Texas A&M program there, but what Texans need to understand is we're not winding down the relationship. So to be clear, Qatar hired a lobbyist here in Texas about a decade ago. I can go back and look on Transparency USA. You can see the Qatari embassy. We're paying a well-known lobbyist here in Texas to advocate for a whole host of things. It's this soft power play. They get an American that I would say is incredibly naive and not well versed in their terrorist activities that have led to the death of thousands of America's sons and daughters in our military. But so this is what people have to understand. They're not our friends. This is a soft power play to ingratiate themselves into less well versed Texans who support the very ideals that we do, which is freedom of religion, freedom of speech. But this is not a religion. It is a political ideology, right? Islamist is a political ideology that seeks to install a authoritarian government across the world. They believe a caliphate should take over the world. And they are still investing in our universities in the Texas A&M TEAS program, or the Texas Engineering Experiment Station, which is doing research for not just Texas, but American national security issues such as nuclear proliferation and artificial intelligence and a whole host of other very, very vital national security issues is taking place proudly in Texas. But the problem is that we are entering into contracts with Qatar and the Qatari Foundation to effectively sell national security secrets. They are giving us money to fund things, and then they have access to all of the information. So I ask you, this is just absolutely appalling, and we must stop the flow of any money from hostile foreign nations. I know Qatar is not named a hostile foreign nation. They should be, in my opinion. But why are Texans not, Americans in general, what is the pushback that you've heard against, well, they're in this unique position where they're in the middle of the Middle East, they're not a large company, and yes, they're trying to play both sides, but it's for diplomatic purposes. When you hear this, and when you hear that they're funding our university systems in Texas, but other places, and having access to national security secrets effectively, what do you say to push back against people that say they're trying to help?
Well, certainly Qatar plays this double game because it has to appeal to the West to have friends from beyond the Gulf, which in different eras has had problems with Qatari policy. It's not just Americans who should have issues with Qatari policy. I mean, it's people throughout the greater Middle East that already do. And so effectively, Qatar plays this double game to appeal to the West to whitewash its involvement supporting Islamist movements throughout the Middle East. It appeals to the West because it needs friends and deterrence power from the greater Gulf region, which could consume Qatar in a day. Mm-hmm. Between 2017 and 2021, a series of countries throughout the Middle East boycotted and blockaded Qatar. And during that time, Qatar cozied up to Iran. Its airlines had to go through Iran over Iranian airspace, and they paid sums of money to the Iranians, the other largest sponsor of terrorism in the world. And so, in essence, that's the double game. They get deterrence power by the United States having a military base on Qatari soil, which Qatar then often tells the United States that it can't use at its full liberty. That is not a true, genuine friendship, in my opinion. That is not a true, genuine ally of the United States, even though in recent years we elevated Qatar to a non-NATO major ally.
I don't want you to speed past this because you have so much great information. For Americans, they want to, many of them have been led to believe that they are our friends. They've given us a nice airplane, from what I'm told. But this is really, really important. So on one hand, it's a sleight of hand trick, right? They give us an airplane, our president an airplane. And on the other hand, they are, what is it? They found internal documents of Hamas leadership saying they are the main funding, the main artery of funding for Hamas. So this does create some confusion in the minds of Americans that are trying to work through this. But you're saying this is very intentional.
It's very strategic. As I mentioned, there's 4 organizations that Qatar founded when Emir Hamid became the emir in 1995. It was all a product of organized statecraft, in essence, to project Qatar's image from beyond the Gulf into the world, to get allies to protect itself. I want to talk briefly about what's going on in Texas. We've talked a bit about what's going on nationally, but I want to refocus on what's going on in Texas. There is a lot of Qatari influence in Texas beyond simply Texas A&M.
Yep.
What we are seeing is at Rice University and in the city of Houston, there is significant Qatari influence. At Rice University, at its Baker Institute, there is a Qatari royal family member, a permanent board member at the Baker Institute. We have seen at least one Qatari royal family member graduate from Rice University. We've also seen the Office of the Mayor of Houston celebrate Qatar National Day, at least on one occasion. We've also, pivoting now towards the University of Houston system, at the University of Houston Clear Lake, the university partnered with the Qatari government to found the Diplomacy Institute. This is literally a partnership with the Qatari government to found an institution within our state boundaries. Pivoting to another city, let's say we move now to the city of Dallas. We have seen, and it's not just education, it's also our emergency responder levels that we're seeing Qatari infiltration. The Dallas police chief was flown out with other officials from the Dallas Police Department to Qatar. The trip was paid for by a Qatari state entity to go and visit and learn about security. Kind of ironic given Qatar's involvement in undermining US security. Arlington PD is expected to perhaps follow suit in the same way as Dallas PD in terms of visiting Qatar. When we think about the Montgomery County emergency responders, they have also been trained, I believe, by Qatar, according to my research, to help once again. It's kind of mind-blowing to think that we are entrusting our emergency responders in the hands of Qatar. And also, of course, when it comes to K through 12 education or community college, it was the University of Houston system that actually helped found the first community college in the state of Qatar. So we are...
Whoa. You've said a lot. Say that again. What?
I believe, double check this, the University of Houston Community College System. Correction. University of Houston Community College System, or the Houston Community College System, was, I believe, directly responsible for establishing the first community college in Qatar.
Wow.
And the first full K through 12 Arabic speaking program. And Arabic's a very important language to learn. There's a lot of rich literature in Arab culture and Islamic culture. And there's a significant distinction between Islamism, as you said earlier,
right,
and Greater Islam. The first K through 12 Arabic language institution in the United States was instituted in Texas and Houston. And so in part, it was sponsored by the Qatar Foundation, but also the former head of the Arabic flagship program here in UT Austin, which I actually partook in, and it was, in the most part, a very good program for learning Arabic. He did receive grants with another UT professor at the time who are no longer there to help expand and proliferate Arabic programs in K through 12 education.
Yeah.
So you see the Qatar Foundation involved in a lot. And there's one thing I don't want to forget, the Qatar charity, even though it's not officially a state charity, it has strong ties to the Qatari government. It actually partnered with the University of Houston system on a food drive. What's crazy about this? The Qatar charity is actually banned in multiple countries due to its terrorism ties. Not the United States, but multiple countries.
Again. There's a charity. Is it called the Qatar charity?
Correct.
Okay, Qatar charity. They partnered with who? The University of Houston?
They partnered with, if I'm correct, the University of Houston or the University of Houston Clear Lake. I believe it could have been both.
Okay.
Double check, but it certainly happened. The Qatar charity partnered with a University of Houston college on a food drive, despite this institution literally being banned in multiple countries.
Where are they banned? Can you give us some examples?
They are banned throughout the Middle East in various countries.
Because they support terrorism. They support jihadist movements murdering innocent people that do not support the Islamist supremacy that is being pushed on Western civilization for sure and has been pushed throughout the Middle East.
Well, certainly, and the irony is that Middle Eastern countries are identifying this charity as radical, and here in the United States we are not. And so the other thing not to, I guess, forget about the Qatar charity, I mean, other than its terrorism ties, the Qatar charity, the fact that it could manage to continuously infiltrate U.S. education, U.S., I guess, one institution in Texas, despite the fact that it is labeled as well by the Counter Extremism Project as a member of the umbrella charity that is banned in the United States called the Union of Good. The
Union of Good.
The Union of Good is banned for its Hamas ties in the United States.
Okay.
The Counter-Extremism Project has identified it as a member charity of the Union of Good, which is, as I mentioned, banned for its Hamas ties.
Right.
But nevertheless, that university in Texas is still partnering with the Qatar charity.
So Texans, we need to ensure that our leadership looks into the Union of Good, or they already have. You're saying that the Qatar Charities is one of their offshoot entities.
Correct.
That helps fund terrorism while pretending to be involved in humanitarian aid by supporting some sort of charitable causes here in Texas.
Correct.
Oh, these people. Okay. So let's go back to the Qatar Foundation, because you talked about it. We talked about the TEAS program. We need to stop taking money. I think we've got some great leaders here in Texas that are going to take this on in the next legislative session, in the 90th, where we are going to stop receiving money from hostile foreign nations or those tied to terrorist entities. So I'm very excited to see that. But the Qatari Foundation is not just funding, as you said, at the university level, K through 12. This has been free game. And they are the ones that are investing in these Arabic and world culture programs under the guise of, we want to understand world history. But what is actually happening? You know, there was a report released by, I think originally it was the Daily Mail, but others picked it up nationally, where their education materials, their curriculum is all sorts of promotion of grandeur for, I would say, the Islamic conquering of 3/4 of Christendom throughout history. But also, they are not allowed to acknowledge the existence of the state of Israel. And so all of their materials that they've been providing does not acknowledge Israel. We were told that it is illegal in their curriculum providing, and lo and behold, a huge map in a charter school, so a publicly funded charter school here in Texas, was of the Middle East, and there was no Israel on it. And of course, it caught attention internationally. And I'm grateful to see that the Texas Education Agency Inspector General is looking into this charter school that is Manera Academy, and is obviously promoting and selling itself in Irving, Texas, to the Islamic community. But this is really just the ideological subversion. It is to revise history, and it is to ultimately paint this picture of camaraderie and partnership when it could not be further from the truth for their actual intentions. So that's in the charter schools, but then we've seen it become very aggressive with the CARE and other entities tied to terrorist networks going into our public schools, demanding celebration of Ramadan, or we're seeing it at the Capitol. It is really this desensitization to what the end goal is for the Islamist supremacists that want to overthrow our way of life and our governments. And I think that's so important for Texans to understand, that they are indoctrinating kids with blow-ups and celebrations, when the truth is, this is a nefarious, evil political ideology that they are seeking to desensitize, demoralize students, and indoctrinate them counter to what the ultimate end goal is, which is to install a caliphate, which is what Qatar wants to do. Is this correct? Their leadership, their rulers, that is their ultimate goal, right? Is to spread this Islamist ideology.
Well, we've seen, as we did in the Arab Spring, Qatar supporting Muslim Brotherhood outfits all throughout the greater Middle East and North Africa. We know what Qatar's motive is when it comes to their efforts to influence and subvert U.S. education. As we've seen through reports, it's likely hand in hand with promoting anti-democratic activity and views, also American views on college campuses, and of course to support negative views towards some of our most loyal allies throughout the Middle East.
Yeah.
And so it's important to note that when we look at the Qatar Foundation and its involvement per se in Newton, Massachusetts, there was a report from Sam Westrop who noted effectively that within the curriculum that was being promoted was a Express Your Loyalty to Qatar program. And it's quite remarkable that we literally have funding coming from Qatar supposedly promoting loyalty to another nation in our curriculum. It's quite surprising to see what we've had. And you mentioned earlier, our leadership needs to take initiative. But a problem, unfortunately, with our leadership at times is sometimes they have had meetings with pro-Qatari lobbyists, such as my mayor in Dallas. I have much respect for him, Mayor Eric Johnson. He's been good for our city. But unfortunately, he has had meetings with the US Qatar Business Council. He's been featured in photos with them. And although he hasn't been on a trip to Qatar, he certainly has probably entertained the notion of partnerships with Qatar, as have other mayors throughout our country. And so we need to really be cautious. We've had a congressman and woman flown to Qatar by the US Qatar Business Council. We need people to view Qatar from simply beyond the lens of a fruitful and productive business partner. They do billions of dollars of trade and deals with Texas oil and energy enterprises, but we need to understand the cost that comes to the future of our youth, who are also being influenced online through AJ Plus, which is a very lefty-leaning media outlet designed to effectively impart state agenda onto our youth. Even though AJ Plus would identify as a private enterprise, it was still ordered under the FARA laws and the Department of Justice to register as a foreign agent. And we've seen Qatar also appeal to the right. It tried to create an Al Jazeera rightly channel to appear to the right. We've seen them getting involved more and more with media on the right, even though for long they've now been involved in media on the left. CNN partnered with the Doha Forum. And we need to make sure that our legislators are getting appropriate news, reliable news, and are being cultured appropriately when it comes to the Qatari threat, which has endangered our national security time again.
That's right. And I think that's what we're hoping to do here, is to recognize the tactics. It's the same tactics as the Chinese Communist Party. It's the same tactics of any of the Marxist entities. This is, the Red-Green Alliance. We talk about this a lot, the green being the Islamists. We cannot and to be clear, there are good people, obviously, that come, either their families or themselves came from the Middle East, that want to enjoy and lift up Western civilization and the values that are based on Judeo-Christian values that came out of the Bible, that were the roots for the founding of America and our founding documents. And that is really, really important to note. But the government entities, the entities that have risen to power, that control the Middle East, they do not share those same values. They may appreciate the financial benefits and blessings and prosperity that capitalism can bring. But ultimately, any of these Islamists that will seek to subjugate women, that will seek to take away the rights of minorities, of the LGBTQ community. I mean, all of these, this is what is so perplexing to me, is one day after the atrocities on October 7th, you're seeing these protests. One day you've got these college kids that are waving free Palestine flags, which, to be clear, life in Palestine is not free. There's nothing free for women or children. They are used as human shields. This is a murderous, dictatorial, Islamist regime. There is nothing free about Palestine. If you don't believe me, go look and see where the rest of the Middle East has refused to take them in as refugees, right? Egypt's like, heck no, we're not doing it. Lebanon's like, no, we're not doing it, for a whole host of terrorist reasons. But it was shape-shifting. It was this, and this is where this partnership, the Red-Green Alliance and the Qatari Foundation, that is funneling these ideals into our classrooms, which is one day you're going, free Palestine, and then the next day you're waving a trans flag. And I'm looking at it going, you don't understand. This is not even remotely close to acceptable. The freedoms that you enjoy here are not available there. And we can see it in the UK, right? The UK now has no-go zones where Islamists have risen up into power. And we really need to see this as a harbinger of these individuals coming with Islamist ideals and vision. They do not assimilate. They do not want our culture. They are having multiple children that oftentimes the state is now taking care of. And they are running for office and or creating their own little Sharia cohorts where, again, you can go to the West and women and children and just society as a whole in these no-go zones, they are still subjugated. They are still under the thumb of these Islamist supremacists. And ultimately, they're just looking for a crack in the door, utilizing oftentimes Western sympathies for inclusive nature and freedom of speech to get their foot in until they can obtain and abstract more and more power from Western countries. And this is what we're seeing time and time again. And Texans are finally opening up to this, which I think is really, really important. You have given us so much great information. I feel like this is one of those podcasts that I'm going to have to watch 3 more times to really grasp what you're saying. But before we wrap up, I want you to look in that camera right there. I want you to talk to the leaders of Texas and the patriots of Texas that see this growing threat. Talk to them about why we have to recognize the threat that Qatar is to American way of life and why we must not close our eyes and ignore the nefarious entities that they are funding and the soft power tactics they are utilizing right there.
Our legislators must understand that when it comes to Qatar, it presents itself as an ally. It funds billions of dollars to various institutions, but we must not forget that at the same time, Qatar funds billions of dollars to terrorist groups worldwide, anti-American terrorist groups that have American blood on their hands. They harbored the eventual mastermind of 9/11 and reportedly enabled his escape. They reportedly restored the Taliban to power. And on top of that, their Al Jazeera state-sponsored media back in the day reportedly filmed our troops being booby-trapped and ambushed and were present there as it happened. This is not a nation that is a true ally of the United States. A non-NATO major ally does not afford us a military base only to tell us that we frequently cannot use it in our greatest hours of need during warfare throughout the Middle East. Qatar is no true ally of the United States. We must actively ensure that funding from Qatar does not go to American universities, especially when that state sponsor continues to encourage anti-American viewpoints, continues to undermine freedom of speech, not just within its own borders, but potentially elsewhere as well. And we need to make sure that we protect our democracy, our academic integrity, and our freedom and our great state. And that starts by taking effort, by taking initiatives to make sure that we purge Qatari funding from US universities, or at least better monitor it. And at the same time, that we educate our leaders to be better aware of the Qatari threat that is posed, and that we also take better effort at the state level to institute laws that mandate better reporting, requiring criteria and protocols when it comes to foreign lobbyists from hostile countries in our own state. And so our future is in your hands. I hope you believe that I'm young enough that you believe my future is worth protecting. But Qatar is a threat to the United States, and it continues to go undiagnosed. And action needs to begin today.
Jordan, thank you for all of the great research that you've been doing for a long time. We're so grateful to have a Texan that is dug in and that knows the facts to truly shine a light on the threat that Qatar is. Thank you for joining us today on Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. And now you have the power.